about the history of singing as a phenomenon, as a thing that humans do and have done for time immemorial, and how that practice, that phenomenon, worked its way into our worship practices. So we'll start by talking about prehistoric song, looking back to the beginning of time as far as we can. It's impossible to trace when archaic humans and precursor species began to sing. And part of this is because singing is tied to the larynx, which is where your vocal folds, your voice box, is. And the development of the larynx happened at some point around the time of the Neanderthals, and maybe a bit more. The idea is that the Neanderthals actually sang as well in their own way. And it's hard to trace much farther back than that because everything to do with your voice, it's all muscles. And muscles, dust to dust, muscles are not preserved in fossil records. So it's hard to trace farther back than that. But certainly the voice is the first musical instrument. It's the most natural musical instrument. Everyone, by and large, is born with a voice. Whatever you may think of your own voice, you have a voice and you can use it to sing. And therefore it predates any musical instrument, any invention to create music with. The oldest musical instrument that we know of is a 43,000-year-old bone flute that was found in caves in Germany, and the voice predates that. If you think about how long it took humans and precursor species, how long it took them to figure how to make an instrument, think about how much longer before that people were singing. And that can give you an idea for the scope of just how old this practice is. And of course, because it's so old, song predates language. Language being a more complex invention of human society, song being something that is native to our very anatomy. And over the years, they've influenced one and the other. Music in general has lots of influence from language, and you see regional influences and regional languages reflected in the music of those regions. Moving slightly sooner, ancient song. We begin to have records of singing and songs in around 3000 BC. Here, our earliest record is 2600 BC. We have the Kesh Temple Hymn, which does not bear with it any kind of musical notation, but because of its nature as a hymn, as a song of praise, we assume it would have been sung. And common to other songs and hymns of that time period in ancient Sumeria, this is ancient Sumerian culture, the hymn lauds and describes the creation of the city Kesh, the ancient city Kesh, its various heroes and its gods. It also happens to be the oldest surviving literature that we've discovered.
And that is in what current day country?
This would be in the Fertile Crescent, Iraq, Iran, Syria, that area. Moving forward 1,200 years, we have the Hurrian hymns, which are an example of sung music. We know that they were sung. There are fragments of musical notation in the cuneiform tablets on which the hymns were found. There's a set of 6 of them. We have not figured out yet how to fully translate the particular dialect that they were written in. And there's also pieces missing from the tablet. So it's not possible to translate fully the songs that are on these tablets. We can't sing them because we can't complete the musical notation. But we do know that they were sung, and there are indications on the tablets saying how it was to be sung. And moving another 1,000+ years, 1,500 years into the future, we have the Seikilos epitaph, which is the oldest surviving complete musical composition. And I'll show you a picture of these last 2 things. So on your left, you have the tablets that the Hurrian hymns are inscribed on. And you can see, just by the state of them, there are pieces missing, there are flakes missing. So along with all the normal problems of translating and identifying the meaning of these tablets, you have pieces missing that you have to work with as well. Then on the right you have the Seculos epitaph, which is essentially a tombstone, a marker, and it's hard to see. Maybe I can even zoom in here. Look at that. So you have here two different things. Oh, this is great. You can see some detail here. So you have on the top what is essentially a note saying, I, Seculos, left this here. He's kind of signing his name there. And then underneath, you can see text here, and you can see these little marks above the text, various symbols. Here we have like a half-open circle. Once again, we have it, a full circle here. This is the musical notation above the words, and we are able to decipher this musical notation from ancient Greece. And so, you can sing this song, and you can play this song. So I thought I would read to you what the text means, and then play the song for you. It's very short. It's a wonderful text, and it just speaks right down the ages. You could hear it today and would think nothing of it if you were told that this text was written today. But here it is. While you live, shine. Have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time demands his due.
So, like ancient Hebrew, there's no spaces between the words, so you have to figure out where one word ended and another began, right? Which really complicates translation.
Well, they managed to do it. And it's a very short song, so I'll just play it for you on the piano here. The oldest song, complete composition that we know of. Accompanied with very early instruments, probably playing drones, single tones that this song would have been sung over the top of. Maybe you would have some kind of percussion instrument playing along as well. We have records of Greek music culture, this being a wonderful example, but somewhat impossible to know just exactly how this would have been performed when it was written. I should say there's also records of ancient Egyptian instruments and musical culture as well, but not preserved as well as the Greek examples. Now, question, yeah?
Oh, I was just going to interject. This is a little ancillary, but we also have our earliest named composer from in about 2300 BCE in Hedwana. And there is some music that survives, but it's very fragmentary.
Yeah.
But she was a priestess, and our earliest named composer dates from that time.
See, here we have a real musicologist here in the room, and I'm going to get a little nervous. It is an interesting thing, actually, and I should note that a lot of the historic examples, the Kesh Temple hymn, the Hurrian hymns, a lot of these are thought to have been written by women as well, because in that culture was priestesses, women who were in charge of temples, and most of the gods, goddesses, were female gods as well. And then something happened, and all of a sudden we kicked women out of religious leadership somewhere along the way. Thankfully, most of us have restored that practice. Moving to more familiar historic religious song, thinking of our Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. We have some ancient traditions here as well. But I'll just note that this word cantillation is kind of a fancy term that basically just means something very similar to chant. It's singing scripture or singing sacred texts. And it's found in every religious culture in some form. Every single documented culture we have sings along with their religious practice in some way. It's a universal aspect. And the oldest pieces of our tradition are the Psalms, by and large, were written between the 10th century BC and the 5th century BC, that period of 500 years. There's also some speculation that Moses wrote a psalm, and that would have been another 300 years earlier than that. But the Psalms were codified and brought together by the 5th century. And it's also thought at that time that this is when the practice of Hebrew cantillation, recitation of Psalms and the Torah was sort of codified at that point by the 5th century BC. And so we have a couple examples here of what these sound like. And I'm trusting that many of you, well actually, I'm assuming all of you were just at our service, right? And we heard two great examples. We have the Great Litany, which was chanted, and then we had the Psalm, which was chanted in Thin chant as well. And the thought is that, and I'm jumping ahead just a little bit here, the thought is that our practice of singing the Psalms, just exactly how I did it a little bit ago, is directly derived from the practice of Hebrew cantillation. There's a psalm tone called tonus peregrinus, which is thought to be the oldest psalm tone, which I did not use today, but I probably could have, and that would have worked well with this. But that tone in particular, the thought is that it really came directly from the Jewish traditions. But here's an example of Hebrew cantillation, and as you listen, think of how it may sound a little similar to what you heard in worship just a little bit ago. I'm going to play this loudly on my phone, and I'm thinking you'll all be able to hear it. Just off the bat, does anyone notice any similarities to plain chant in our tradition? Just curious. Hands? Anyone brave? Renee?
I think it's very similar.
Yeah? Specific?
It seems like there's spacing, like there's a phrase.
Yeah.
And a phrase.
Anyone?
Well, it's kind of chanted, part of it's like chanted the same note and then it kind of moves up. And,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, the different verses tend to start on the same note, which was this note here, they tended to start on this one, and then go up here and do some stuff, and then always come back down here at the end of the phrase as well, which is exactly what our Psalms do as well. We have an ending tone, and we have a reciting tone. So in the psalm, sing to the Lord a new song. Here's our reciting note that we sing a lot of the text to, and then we go on da-dee-da-dee-da-da, and here's our ending tone. Hebrew cantillation works in a similar way, but there's a whole different set of traditional tropes, they call them, which are little fragments of musical motion. Similar in Gregorian chant, you have neumes, and you have set types of neumes that function in the same way in different chants. So here in passages of the Torah, you'll see symbols written above specific words and syllables, and those symbols correspond to the notes that you would then sing for those words. Also similar, I think, for me, is in the Islamic tradition, Quranic recitation, which is an interesting thing because Islam as a religion has a complicated relationship with music. The Quran itself, the scripture, doesn't say a whole lot about music, but almost of equal importance in Islam are a collection of texts called the Hadith, which is the collective sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. And in that religion, along with scripture, the sayings of the Prophet are meant to guide your life. And there are a couple of those sayings that say very clearly that music is not a good thing, that it's something of the earth that detracts from the divine and so on. So there's a complex relationship. So if you were to ask a Muslim about Quranic recitation, they would say, no, this is not song, this is not music, this is recitation, it's different. But let's take a listen, and you can tell me what you hear.
ويكفر عنكم من سيئاتكم والله بما تعملون خبير ليس عليك هداهم ولكن الله يهدي من يشاء.
Okay, similarities there. Anyone noted?
Sounds like chant to me.
It sounds.
They kind of go on a recitative tone, and
Yeah.
then they go down
Yeah.
at the end.
Kind of like we do with chants,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
With our chant tradition. There's a similar and this is the ending note of every passage that she's singing, and then she goes up here and sings some text and does some ornaments, and then back down here to that final tone. Real scholars may say otherwise, but to me, just by my ear.
Is there any historical record of notation for?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's very similar to Hebrew recitation in that sense that there are symbols.
Okay.
Not like our modern musical notation, but there are symbols that
Like
tell
song.
you like the shape of the line
Okay.
more than specific notes. And interesting to note here also that there are two parts of this tradition, tajweed and tartil, which are similar to our types of chant. We have three types of Christian chant, which the three of those are syllabic. You have one note to one syllable. You have pneumatic chant, which is mostly 1 to 3 notes per syllable. And then you have melismatic chant, which is very florid and has many notes to one syllable. Similar with tajweed and tartil, one is kind of syllabic, it's less ornate, and the other is quite drawn out and ornate. And the thought is that this was developed and codified in the 8th and 9th century. Actually, right around the time that Gregorian chant was being codified as well. And it's also, I think, important to think about and realize that these are not separate worlds. Gregorian chant and Quranic recitation and Islamic calls to prayer, all these things, they existed in many places in the world in the same city, a block away from each other. There's wonderful examples in Syria, in Aleppo, which was a really important crossroads city in ancient times, and it's just absolutely devastating and terrible, the unrest and the warfare that has just destroyed so much of that city. But we know that in that place there were traditions of Syriac chant, Christian chant, existing right next to these Islamic recitations and calls to prayer. And if I had some recordings, I could play them for you, and you would also, I think, hear some similarities between there. But all of these existed in similar places at similar times, and I think it would be close-minded to think that they did not influence each other in some way. I think maybe the most, well, moving on to Christian chant, one of the most clear examples of this is in Spain, which Spain, if you don't know, had significant Islamic influence over the years. Portions of it were conquered and then retaken and so on and so forth. So the Spanish chant tradition, predating Gregorian chant, is called Mozarabic chant. And very clearly has influences from Islamic culture there. But by and large, our chant practices, as I say, are thought to be developed after Jewish psalm singing and recitation practices. And also important to note that before Gregorian chant, which is very specific and codified certainly today and has been since the 9th century or so, but before that happened, by papal decree, there were almost countless regional chant practices. And we have clear record of some of these, Ambrosian chant being one, Old Roman chant being another. And we know of others because of how they reflect in Gregorian chant. The papal decree kind of took all these regional styles and blended them into one. So for example, we know that there was a Celtic chant tradition in England and the British Isles at the time. We don't have any records of what that chant looked like exactly, but we can take a look at Gregorian chant and say, okay, we know what Ambrosian chant looks like, we know what Old Roman chant looks like, we know what Gallic chant looks like. Where are the moments where we're seeing something in Gregorian chant that doesn't resemble what we know? And that's how we can kind of pull out, okay, this obviously has come from a different tradition. So there are really just dozens of different types of regional chant practices that were then blended together and in some cases eradicated to create Gregorian chant. Kind of a tradition in the Catholic Church of merging everything into one practice. Similarly with liturgical rites, almost every region and important center of human life had its own regional rite in the church that was celebrated differently. And eventually Rome decided, no, it's all going to be the Roman rite. And that's what's used in most places now. These days, there's some movement to recognizing the old rites again in different regions, but by and large, it's the Roman way. And it's the same case with Gregorian chant.
And Zachary, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, so it's Gregorian after a Pope Gregory?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yep, Gregory the Great, who was in the 8th century, and this is one of these cases where it's named after him, and certainly he did something to work on the codification, but by and large it happened after that. Gregory the Great redesigned the Schola Cantorum, which those of you that come to Compline and sing in our Schola Cantorum, this is where the namesake comes from, which is in Rome at St. Peter's. Before Gregory, by a few hundred years, there was the founding of Schola Cantorum, a school for singing that was sort of meant to train young singers and sort of be an authority of singing in the church. So it went through serious reform with Gregory the Great. And that led to lots of developments down the line. But this is one of the cases with naming things after people that probably didn't actually do it all themselves. So after Gregorian chant, we have not too long after we have the beginning of polyphonic music, centered largely in France around Notre Dame in Paris in the 11th and 12th centuries.
What is polyphonic?
Polyphonic music.
So get it, many sounds.
Many sounds, yeah. So chant, you just have one line, right? And maybe you have a whole bunch of people singing that same unison line, which was the way it was done in many places for a long time. There are evidence of other cultures in other areas that had, for example, in Africa, that had polyphonic music long before the West did. But from a Western perspective, the idea of singing two notes at once was kind of frowned upon because you get some impure intervals as you sing, and it can be problematic. The devil's interval being one, right? Tritone in modern times. But after you start to have two lines in the 12th century or so, then you get three lines, and it's kind of a quick tumble down to 4-part, 5-part, 6-part plus. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, you have Palestrina, you have all these French composers of folk music with polyphonic things, and then Tallis and Bird and all these wonderful composers that we know and we hear of often. We won't talk about those folks too much because we know them pretty well, and the style of music kind of clearly develops down the ages. So we know that humans everywhere sing, that all these cultures that we just talked about have song, records of song, but why? Why is singing so universal? There's no real scientific consensus. There are many theories, and some with more evidence than others, but there is no consensus on why we do this. various theories here. Dissemination of information. You can apply meaning to a song such that if you hear just a few notes, you will know what it means. For example, ta-da-da-dum, ta-dum, charge, right. Just from those 4 or 5 notes, you know exactly what that means. Similarly, other trumpet calls used in battles. So the dissemination of information to a large group of people in a short amount of time, and tying in with communication over distance. The sung voice carries a lot farther than the spoken voice. And also trumpets, of course, song carries farther than voice. There's also a thought, by the way, with chanting, that chanting came about in the church in such a big way because you have these great big stone cathedrals, and if you were speaking, no one would ever hear you in these acoustics, right? But when you sing in unison, the sound carries much farther and it becomes much more easy to hear what is sung. Group bonding and identification is a really major theory behind music and singing. And we'll talk about some more of the evidence for that later, but we know that singing in groups, particularly singing, and particularly in groups, promotes strong social bonding and strong communities. Another theory, influence of emotions. I think anyone that's ever listened to music of any type, knows that music influences our emotions, right? Our lives are saturated with music. And if you think just for a second about going about your normal life and how often you have music on, for most people, it's almost the entire day, right? Maybe we have an alarm clock that plays the radio when we wake up. We go to the grocery store, there's music playing in the stores. We get in the car, we turn our radio on. When we get home from work, maybe we sit on the couch and we play some Mozart or something relaxing, right? Music is there all the time. You watch a movie, there's always music playing, right? It surrounds our lives because advertisers, artists, people have discovered and realized that music can influence your emotions to get you to buy things, to get you to feel certain things in certain moments, right? And we know that music does a better job of that than anything else. Looking at pictures, videos, reading, music does a better job of influencing your emotions than anything else. And finally, the most enigmatic concept, expression, the idea that singing and music in general is something that humans have to do because we are human, because we have a soul. Something about the human condition makes us sing. Very difficult to prove that concept in any way. But as I mentioned, just can't repeat this enough, that singing is universal and found in every culture, in every place, in every time. And think to yourself, what else is so universal to existence as a human? Eating, sleeping, breathing, standard living functions, but I can't think of anything else that's so universal. Can anyone else? Please, if you can, I'd love to know.
Language.
Language, which we know is later development than singing, right? Singing developing before language. Anything else that's so universal? Can you think of anything?
Reproduction.
Sorry?
Reproduction.
It's another bodily function. Yeah. I think, and art, visual arts in another way, I think is also fairly universal. But why? It's such a fascinating question. I don't think we can answer it, but why are these things so universal? And we've discovered that singing is particularly applicable and found in religious expression. A few more scientific things here that I think are really interesting from kind of an evolutionary standpoint. Music is so important to the human species that babies learn the voices and language of their mothers from within the womb, so that when a baby is born, it recognizes its mother's voice. And what do mothers do to crying babies to calm them down? They sing, right? the language issue is really interesting and ties into the connection of language to music. I mentioned earlier that regional languages then have correspondence to that region's language. For example, in Germany, in the German language, you have a strong impulse on like the first syllable of a word. Handel, Johann, Frederick, right? And so in the music, you have also strong impulses on what we call downbeats or strong beats of the music, right? In French, it's the opposite way around. A lot of time in French names, you have the emphasis on the second part, right? Vidor, for example, Lully, other multisyllable French names. You get the idea. And so on. In the music, you have more of an emphasis not so much on a heavy downbeat, but in fact kind of the opposite. So babies learn these practices within the womb and establish also what are called phonemes at that time. And the phonemes are the particular collection of sounds used in a given language. And
it'll come back. It does this every time.
And once you have developed a phoneme, you continue to develop these, I think for about the first 6 months after you're born. But once you've got them, and you can never get them if you don't. So for this reason, if you listen to a recording of someone speaking Hindi or some other very foreign language to English, there will be sounds that you will not be able to distinguish between, which is just really bizarre. I maybe will find a video or something, or you could look on your own, but I've had a professor play such an example to me where someone is speaking and giving examples of different vowel sounds in their language, but to everyone in the class, it all sounds the same. It all sounds the same, because we don't have that set of phonemes learned at birth, so we can't distinguish between those sounds. Very interesting. Also interesting is musical entrainment, a fancy word to talk about basically tapping your foot to the beat, or doing something physical where you match to the beat of the song. And we can observe this in babies as young as 5 months old, that if you play music for a baby, they'll start moving in time to the beat in some way, which tells us from an evolutionary standpoint that that is an important skill for some reason, to be able to match the beat in some way. Very interesting. And I think I mentioned already that music elicits stronger emotional response than other stimuli. And all of this, by the way, comes from very rigorous scientific studies. And I've got a bibliography at the end, and I'm happy to send it to you if you want to read some of these studies. But it's really interesting. They've done MRI studies on music as well, and that's where a lot of this information comes from. We know that music elicits a stronger response and stronger bonding response than other arts because they stuck people in MRIs and watched what their brains did when they played music versus showing them pictures and things. Lots of reasons why people sing, but why don't we sing? Because we used to sing a whole lot more as humans, and especially in our Western culture, we used to sing a lot more. I think a broad reason is the transfer of music from the home and the community hall and the church to the concert hall. And this started, I think, really along with the development of opera in the very early Baroque period. And certainly by the time we get to Mozart in the classical period, we have what I'm calling diva culture. These star sopranos or star tenors, what have you, these star singers that are just held on the highest pedestal in society and have all this money and live this high society life. That still exists today. But the idea that came about because of that is, well, only these people get to sing. Only these people that are divinely blessed with talent, innate talent, are good enough, right? This is sort of the logical continuation of that tradition. And so if they're the only ones that are good enough, why should you try? Right? This is kind of the logical extension. Access to recorded music has also lowered community music making. It used to be if you wanted to hear music, you had to go and hear it played live or sung live, or do it yourself. Families used to sing together all the time, especially once the piano was able to be mass-produced and became affordable for a lot of more middle-class families. Then music making in the home just exploded. It's always been something for wealthy families that could afford instruments, but really the piano helped music get into homes in a much bigger way. But now that we can pick up our phones and listen, for example, to the oldest recorded song in human history, right? Like I just pulled up and played for you. We can listen to anything we want at any time. I don't think we as a society have fully decided what recordings mean, because there's still the idea that going to a concert, whether that's rock music or classical or what have you, that there's something different about that than listening to a recording. There's still something special about live music that recordings haven't fully replaced yet. But all the same, people go to concerts far less frequently than they used to, because we can listen to music at home, and concerts are expensive and take a lot of time and all these things. But by and large, music being taken out of the home, out of the community, into the concert hall has raised high barriers to community music making. We have also a significantly reduced, I think for these reasons, we have a significantly reduced cultural repertory of song. I'm just curious to see, I'll shout out a couple examples, but let's see if we can create a little list here of songs that we all know here in this room, and that means knowing the music and knowing all the words. So, Happy Birthday. All right, we all know Happy Birthday. The ABCs.
Yes.
Jesus loves me.
Jesus Loves Me. Anyone?
Yeah.
Maybe. You see, we're already encountering issues. Old MacDonald had a farm. Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Yeah.
Row, row, row your boat.
Row, row, row your boat. The national anthem.
Baby.
Yeah, most of us national
Just
anthem.
one verse.
Any other songs that you think every person in this room?
Rock-a-bye baby.
Yeah. Anyone saying no? I don't know that one.
Oh,
I had to think for myself, you know.
it's been a while since
Yeah.
you heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Christmas hymns for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And wish
And
Knowing
when
all the words.
When you first did this, I said to a group of mixed age, but I'll bet this could be King of the Road by Roger Miller. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's certainly.
Yeah, oh, thank you. The only one I wasn't on the word earlier. So, a small list, less than 10, that we came up with here.
We can go on.
Some children's songs, yeah.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of examples.
When I say those are mostly children's songs. We don't do as much as Home on the Range.
Exactly, yes.
Well, they're like folk songs.
Home on the Range, we all know the first words and the first notes, but after that it's like, I don't know. At least that's for me. So, you see how quickly we run out of ideas, right? It used to be in American culture that there was a repertory of 80 to 100 songs that at community gatherings everyone could just sing together. 80 to 100 songs. And here we've just had a hard time coming up with 10.
Oh, I could.
Give us another try.
But I grew up with
Yeah.
lots of songs
Yeah.
from like school, in
Yeah.
camp, in church,
Right? And
and records we had at home, but I don't think children do so today, particularly folk music and things.
children
like
sing
that.
a lot more, as Monica just said, children sing a lot more than adults do. When you're going through school, children sing a lot, and that's where, as Monica
But
said, a
not-
lot of the songs we just listed
Not
were
every
children's.
school has music teachers, I think.
Right.
I mean, Monica knows half an hour a week of music
Yeah.
in Garfield.
Well, they do more in costumes.
That's good. Yeah, glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But, you know, in my family, I grew up, when we would travel, we sang.
Yeah.
In the car.
In the car.
Yes, yes.
I wonder if as many people do that nowadays, because everybody's got, you know.
Yeah.
Just listen to the
I
radio or
agree.
Spotify or whatever.
Yeah.
But the
You know,
idea
that's
is,
tragic.
yeah,
You know, because there are songs that my grandson, who's 1.5, won't grow up.
Mm, mm.
He does know person, but
Yeah.
it'll be different.
Yeah, and you can
70 years.
you have some
later.
influence there.
Yes.
You know, you can make a change. But the idea is that from a broad cultural perspective, I mean, those of you that are of a different generation than I am will think, oh, well, these songs are so well known, but here we are in this gathering looking for 100% consensus, and I'm just not going to know them, right? Same with other people my age. Whatever that song Craig said, I have no idea who even that singer is.
And also not fewer people going to church reduces music in
Yeah.
children's lives.
I think,
As
yeah,
well
that's
as
another
adults.
thing.
Yeah.
It's wrapped
And that
up in that
community
community
singing.
fabric. Yeah,
Just-
yeah. It's folk music, it's religious music, in all aspects we don't sing as much as we used to.
But it is a universal trait throughout humankind. I mean, I can go to younger generations and I can see them as I'm alongside them in a car and they're just going to town. You know, I sing while I'm making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my
Yeah.
kitchen. It's,
Practicing
I
your
think
Compline
it's-
music. The point is that people used to sing a lot more
Yeah.
and used to know a lot more than we do collectively as a culture today. And finally, a lack of confidence due to all of the above.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Many of us, many folks at the church I've heard from, oh, I can't sing. Or, oh, my teacher told me 50 years ago that I can't sing.
And it's the same way about visual art.
Yeah.
It's our education system or whatever, how we revere creative people.
Right, this diva culture
Yeah.
of sort of putting people on a pedestal and thinking that, well, I hate the word talent for this reason, right? Whenever someone says, oh, you're so talented, I go, oh, that's kind of an insult, because actually I've worked very hard, you know, to do what I do. And there's kind of this idea that, oh, people are just born with this ability. No, everyone has the ability. Maybe some people have to work a little bit more or a little bit harder than others, but everyone has the ability. There's no divine blessing that gives you the ability to create music. You already have it. Yes, sir?
And I have to put a plug in for Evening Compline. It's not, I don't look with terror on attending the service and singing in it, largely because you've never blown up in teaching us, in explaining the music to us. Every service, as we're practicing for that hour and a half before the service, we're getting these little lectures from you on music and the like, and you're just so supportive. Again, if you're thinking you don't have a voice, he's the one to change your opinion.
What he's really saying is I have a hard time holding myself back. So
Oh.
if any interesting thing pops into my mind, I just have to talk about it and then I can't shut up. So, humans sing and have for a long time. We've talked about why we sing. We've talked about why we don't sing. Why should we sing? Group singing strongly promotes social bonding, more than almost anything else. And it corresponds to the size of the group as well. So this is such an interesting phenomenon, that the larger the group that you have singing, if you're singing with them, the stronger, the more connected you will feel with those people. Even if they're total strangers you've never met before, if you're singing in a group of 200, you'll feel a stronger bond to those 200 people than if you sang in a group of 4 of your close friends. It's kind of bizarre, isn't it? But it goes back to that sort of evolutionary stuff that we were talking about, creating strong community. There's a mechanism there that exists in singing. We know that singing together causes the release of the hormone oxytocin, known as the love hormone or the bonding hormone, that happens in many instances of social bonding. But singing is a wonderful way that introduces that hormone in, and that creates that sense of bonding. I don't know whether I mean lowers the pain threshold or raises, but you feel pain less when you're singing in a group because also of that hormone as well. We know that group singing increases immune function for some reason. We don't know, we just know
We're
it does.
spewing our germs out.
That's right. Or sharing part.
Well, what we found is that, again, for whatever reason, singing in a group raises in a statistically significant way the levels of
IgA.
secretory immunoglobulin A. I was trying to get one of our medical folks to pronounce it for me, which exists in your mucous membranes. So I don't think we know really why that happens, but it does, and it's an interesting thing. Music and song are particularly powerful mnemonic devices. You will never forget the ABC song for as long as you live, right? You'll never forget the alphabet for that same reason. Anyone trying to think of the, it's like, okay, what's the fourth to last letter of the alphabet? You probably think A, B, C, D, E, F, right? It's ingrained in your memory. And an interesting thing I didn't put on here, and I think many of you may know this, is that with Alzheimer's and dementia patients,
Yes.
music is a wonderful therapy tool for these patients. And you can find videos all over the internet on, you have a person with Alzheimer's or dementia and someone puts headphones on with their favorite song, and it's like the light comes back and the
Tony Bennett's a good example of that.
yeah. I mean, just wonderful, because for several years he was struggling, but he still went and performed. He passed away just last year, wasn't he? Yeah.
I think same with Glenn Campbell.
Yeah,
Singing
yeah,
that
he could
show.
sing his
Yeah,
repertoire.
yeah.
So it just gives you an idea of just how powerful music is in staying in the mind. Yeah.
Just a quick note, I still remember my address from kindergarten because my mom would stick all that stuff in songs. So I still remember
We
my
did that with our kids.
Yes.
We did the same thing.
So we know that singing, putting things in song, helps us remember them. And here we have this quote that many of us know and have heard before: the one who sings prays twice. So we know that music influences our emotions. We know that music helps us remember things. Well, what do you think that does with sacred texts? The music influences how we perceive the text. Is it a happy text? Is it sad? Is it uplifting? Is it downlifting, downcasting? And it helps you remember the text, right? So here's some sort of scriptural discussion of song. We all know many of the psalms, several of the songs, sing to the Lord a new song. There's 3 or 4 psalms that begin this way, right? There's also in Isaiah, the Old Testament, with a voice of singing, declare ye, tell this, utter it even to the end of the earth, say ye, the Lord hath redeemed his servant Jacob. With a voice of singing. But why? Why singing? Why not shout? Here specifically, with a voice of singing. Praise the Lord with a lyre, make melody to him with a harp of 10 strings, sing to him a new song, play skillfully on the strings with loud shouts. Here we have some shouting. It is right to give thanks to the Lord, to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness by night, to the music of the lute and the harp, to the melody of the lyre. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your work. At the works of your hands I sing for joy. Sing.
There's a song for that. We have made me glad, we have made.
And I don't know that one. Cultural pride. Yeah. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the whole earth. Sing to the Lord, bless his name. Tell of his salvation from day to day.
There's a song for that one.
There's a song for all of the psalms. Because psalm, the word itself, means song, essentially. Sing to the Lord a new song. Here we go again with new songs. For he has done marvelous things. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises. From the letters of Paul, this is one example, but Paul mentions music several times in his letters. Here he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. From the letter to the Colossians. And the final example here, there are many more examples throughout Scripture. We could be here all day talking about them. But in the Gospel of Luke, we have several songs. The song of Zachary when he hears that Elizabeth will bear John the Baptist in her old age, right? The Song of Mary that she sings in response to the angel announcing that she will give birth to Jesus, right? The Song of Simeon that Simeon sings when he sees Jesus at the temple. We know that as the Nunc Dimittis in Latin, the Song of Mary, the Magnificat, the Song of Zachary, the Benedictus. Examples of important biblical figures responding to momentous events with song. That in this telling of the gospel, these figures receive incredible news, and the first thing they do is sing. Now, why is that?
The emotional part.
Emotional part.
Expression.
Expression. In line with the Psalms, right? Paul, why is he telling people to sing together? The letters of Paul, by and large, are to communities that are having problems, right? There's heresies afoot. There are conflicts in the communities, and Paul writes to them saying, no, here is how to exist in community. You know, here is how to serve each other and serve God. And so in Colossae, there were issues of heresies and things like this, I think having to do largely with angels. And Craig, maybe you know better than me, but I think I remember reading something about angels being a problem and revering angels too much. And so to cure this problem, Paul prescribes singing. And we know from our previous discussion why he's done this. Because psalms and hymns teach good theology, right? Our hymnal is a wonderful repository of the theology going back hundreds of years, right? Psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, they teach good theology. They're easy to remember because music is a great mnemonic device, right? And singing together builds strong community. All these things we just learned. So of course Paul's telling this community, sing together. It will make your community stronger. Yeah?
You know, I don't remember the conflict in Colossians, but I do recall there's some consensus that 1 Corinthians 13 was probably an early hymn as well, right? Which we read at weddings and such. But
Yes.
It was likely.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are several examples also of Paul just telling communities to sing in the same way. I could have listed a couple more.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's not, what I'm about to say doesn't really have anything to do with exhortation, so, and you're probably going to get to it, but I was thinking, one of the things about singing in church, and your job, when you match, the songs that we sing, the hymns that we sing with the lessons of the gospel. I mean, it's a learning,
Yes.
you sort of,
Yes.
the message gets into you in a different way.
Yes, there are two opportunities in our worship services to encounter scriptural exegesis, to have the scriptures that we hear being read explained to you. You have two opportunities. One is the sermon, right? Most of the time, sermons are based on one of the readings for the day, right? Talking about that reading, explaining perhaps its historical context, how it speaks to us through the ages to today. The other opportunity is through the hymns. The hymns do the same thing. Some hymns are paraphrases of psalms or scriptural passages, but even within these paraphrases, there are still aspects that elucidate the text of the reading in a different way. But a lot of the hymns are poetry written by priests and folks in religious life for several hundred years, really meditating on specific readings.
Today was a good example.
Which one?
The last hymn was by Thomas More.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful hymn writer. And on Ash Wednesday we had Dawn.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
Yeah. You recognize names if you start looking at who has written these hymns. Many of the greatest spiritual thinkers over the ages have written hymns. Speaking of hymns, we have our closing hymn of the day here. Just to recap a little bit, I think it's very important to remember that everyone, all humankind, in every place, in every time, have engaged in singing. It's absolutely universal. We've not encountered any culture, no matter how remote, that does not sing and create music together. We know that singing builds a strong and healthy community. One of the strongest things we can do together. If you see a new person in church and you want to welcome them and make sure that they feel like they can come back and be a part of this community, well, you better sing with them, right? And we know, as I mentioned earlier, we know that the larger the group that's singing, the stronger the bonding effect. And it does matter if you're singing, because if you have a group of 16 singing out of 80, right, the effect is much reduced. So if you want to welcome newcomers, you better be singing with them. Scripture tells us to sing a new song, in parentheses, not all the old chestnuts. The Psalms could have said that, right? Sing to the Lord your favorite song. Sing to the Lord the song of your people. Sing to the Lord the traditional songs. They could have said this, right? But no, it says sing to the Lord a new song. A new song. And why is that? Any thoughts?
Keep thinking.
Keep thinking. Refresh your praise, your prayers in something new. Right? Don't stay with what you know, but continually expand and refresh.
Otherwise it becomes like rote. It
Becomes
doesn't-
rote,
Yeah,
right.
so it's not as meaningful.
And also, for lack of a better term, just keeping up with the times. As in, there are hymns that we no longer sing that I grew up with.
Yeah, taste change and
Well,
language
and
changes,
theology
changes, Battle Hymn of the Republic.
I miss once to every man and nation, but it's no longer that one chant. I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
feel. It's like, no, you can do that anytime, so that.
Yeah. And thinking about singing with good theology, powerful mnemonic device, when we tune all these things together, body in the physical act of singing, your mind as you think about the words you're singing, as you think about the notes you're about to sing in context with everything else, your spirit, you pray while you sing, and your voice. When all these things are centered on the divine, centered on God, I think this is the most powerful moment of praise within our context. And there's ties to this in what psychologists term flow state. Is anyone familiar with flow state? You all enter into flow state and you seek it out, whether you know it or not. This is the phenomenon of being so engaged with something that you lose track of time, essentially. So you watch a really good movie and it's over like that. Oh my gosh, it's been 2 hours, you know. You go to a really good concert and you listen to all these songs and all of a sudden it's been 3 hours and it's time to go home. This phenomenon of losing yourself in the flow of time is very pleasurable to humans, really. And we seek it out, whether we know it or not. We try to engage in things that get us in the zone like that. Yeah.
Sorry, I know we're trying to finish up. I just had a very late thought about, why did humans start singing, or what? My theory, nature sings.
Mm-hmm.
So, way back, someone heard a bird singing
Yes.
and tries to mimic that. I mean, whales sing, wolves sing. I mean,
Yeah.
nature sings, and so we would
Yeah.
try to do it sound like
And
that.
I think I neglected to talk about that this session. I did earlier, the earlier one. But when we say that humans have sung deep into prehistoric time, that 43,000-year-old bone flute and singing predating that, it would not be recognizable, a lot of that real ancient singing, to anything that we think of singing today. Chances are it was imitations of nature and sort of, I don't want to say grunting or, but ways of communicating before language. And again, we know how short of a musical line we need to influence emotion or to convey an idea. And the thought is that probably singing first developed this way, like birds and other animals in nature. And of course, we know that animals create soothing sounds, right, to soothe babies and things like this, and humans would have been the same way, right? You're out in the wilderness, there are various carnivorous animals in the darkness, right? And your baby starts crying. Oh my gosh, what do? You make soothing sounds, right? Many animals in nature do this as well. Flow state. Back to this just for a second to wrap it all together. Body, mind, spirit, voice. When you're entrained in all these things together in worship, the chance of you entering into that flow state together collectively is much higher than if you just were to read the text or sing without text. But doing it all together focuses the mind on the divine. Now, that's all well and good. Some of you are probably still thinking, that's great, I understand, this is interesting, but I still can't sing, right? That teacher that taught me 50 years ago told me I can't sing, and by golly, I still believe him, right? So here are some practical pieces of advice to help facilitate your singing. And I want to scroll for all of you readers. I don't want you to read that last thing just yet. Use the introduction of a hymn to hum along. Don't hum a solo. But quietly hum along while the organ is playing the introduction to familiarize yourself with the tune. And I give you permission. The power vested in me as director of music, it's okay to sit out the first verse. Right? If you hummed along to the introduction, you think, I want to sing with confidence and I just don't feel like I have it yet. Sit out the first verse. You better come in on the second, but sit out the first verse and continue to hum along and listen and enter into the song with the rest of the group. Try to think of singing in worship as an offering left at the altar, not a performance. Now, because of all those cultural things we talked about, right, that diva culture, this is very difficult to do because for hundreds of years we've been raised now thinking that music is something for the elite blessed with talent, right? But if you can think of your singing, your particular singing, as an offering that you leave at the altar, I think it takes away a lot of that stress and fear of judgment that comes with singing in front of and with other people. And I feel confident in saying that God is not going to reject your offering of song. Regardless of how you might feel about it, well, I can't sing, my voice isn't good, people are going to judge me. I don't think God minds one way or another, right? You think back to the story of the little drummer boy, right? Whether it's true or not, it's a great story because here you have these kings bringing kingly gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, right? And a boy simply brings what he can, which is a little bit of music, right? Bring what you can, leave your offering, and it will be accepted. And if you think of it that way, I think that the judgment of others matters less. At our best, I think we don't judge others based on what other gifts they give of time and resources and energy. But when it comes to art, we're a little quicker to judge than with other things. So if you don't judge someone's other offerings, why judge offerings of song? We hear in the Eucharist, sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, right? The idea that we're not sacrificing an animal, right? Or a sacrifice of food, but the sacrifice is our praise and thanksgiving. And how do we show forth praise? With song, right? Historically, with song. So leave your offering and try not to worry about the judgment of others. And from a practical standpoint, the more you do something, the more confidence you will have in doing that thing, right? So consider joining the All Saints Choir, this group, our codified pickup choir, which is meeting next in 2 weeks. We'll meet at 9:15 right here in this space, and it's a low stakes, hopefully no judgment, but certainly low judgment, safe space to just use your voice in a collective group for all those benefits we talked about earlier. And remember, I am offering free voice lessons to anyone who may want them. And it doesn't mean that you're going to become an opera star, right? Or that's what you want to do, but it's just something to increase your confidence, right? To counteract those terrible words that you heard from a sister or a brother or a mother or a grandchild or a teacher. You can't sing, your voice is not good, right? These things can be counteracted. It takes time because they stick with us for a long time. But these are some ways to begin to get past them. And finally, hopefully you didn't all read this already, an admonition here from Saint Nicetas, however you say that, of Remesiana from the 4th century, 4th and into the 5th century. The objection to singing is the invention of heretics. When their faith grows cold, they think up reasons for rejecting song. And the closing rhetorical question, when next we worship together, will you be singing? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to send my bibliography to anyone if you want to go and read some of these articles yourself. Just send me an email and I'll send them off to you. Really fascinating articles.
Thank you so much. That was great.